Welcome to season 2 of AI Cybersecurity Podcast. In this episode, Caleb and I had the chance to speak with Daniel Miessler, the same Daniel Miessler behind unsupervised learning, who has years of experience in cybersecurity and has been prolifically talking about AI and how AI is evolving, specifically around would we reach AGI or general AI in, say, 2025, which is actually next year. If you are someone who is a CISO or a cybersecurity practitioner who is exploring AI and what some of the threat model you should be thinking about when you're looking at LLM in your own organization or any of the LLM models that you may be thinking about implementing in using API gateways, API security, data security, or what else should you think about? Is phishing or spear phishing specifically a thing? So in this episode, myself, Caleb, and Daniel, we spoke about some of the threat actors which are realistic today. What would be the first part of cybersecurity that would get to know more about how bad things can become from a threat actor perspective, so the blue team can prepare for what they should be doing. Now, obviously, I do want to put a disclaimer out there as well. The conversation about AI is always evolving to the point that even Daniel mentioned that some things that were announced at OpenAI Dev Day or Developer Day, he had to refactor a lot of things that he was working on before just by some of the announcements that came through. In a lot of ways, it is like the whole cloud race as well, where as we all keep catching up on what's happening in the AI world, some more changes coming by the next episode. So there was a lot of conversation in this episode about what are some of the ways you can approach doing security for models in your organization? What are some of the realistic threats that you can look at from this? I guess if you were to think about cybersecurity, and if you are a CISO looking to build a cybersecurity roadmap and are considering things around AI, what you should be doing to safeguard against threats you may have. Also, what should you be looking at from a perspective of approaching AI in the first place? Should you and your team be doing something about AI already? And all that and a lot more. I'm super excited because we're also doing the second part of this episode as well, because we had so much more to talk about. And in this specific episode, we've primarily focused on helping you build that next roadmap for your cybersecurity 2024 plan while you consider AI in there as well. We were grateful enough to have a lot of these conversations with a lot of the community from the Cloud Security podcast as well. So thank you so much for that as well. And this is our season 2, as I said, the beginning of it. We already had one season. I can't believe it's gone by so quickly. But if you found value from season 1, and if you haven't, definitely check out season 1 where we did a primer on the whole artificial intelligence. What does that really mean? And if you're here for the second or third time, I would really appreciate, if you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, I would really appreciate a review or rating that you can drop us over there so more people can find out about us. Or if you're watching from YouTube or LinkedIn, feel free to definitely drop us a like or follow, subscribe, so we get to know that, hey, this is the kind of content you want. If you do have any questions, feel free to reach out. We would have all the links and topics we spoke about in the show notes, along with how to contact us as well. I really hope you enjoyed this episode because we had so much fun having this conversation. And I'm looking forward to part 2 that we recorded. But this has been amazing. I'm super excited about what the possibility of AI is. And I hope after listening to the episode, you also walk away looking at both sides of the good, bad, and ugly. I guess 3 sides. But I hope you enjoy this episode. I will see you in the next one. Peace.
Quite a few people come up and ask me, hey, Caleb, what do you think about AI security stuff? We know that you're not starting an AI security company. I always get that. But
they don't believe you. They don't believe you.
But I was like, okay, I need to answer this. And the reason why I just don't think AI security is interesting, it's just right now, I don't think it's interesting. Where as AI evolves, this is where I do think it becomes interesting. So that was just my post. I've had it in my deck for a while. I just decided to post it. What do you want to talk about? That's more interesting to me.
Yeah, I think the outline that you laid out was pretty good. I think, Caleb, your point is interesting. It's all about timelines. It's not like whether or not this stuff is going to happen. Pretty much every prediction people have made is going to happen. The question is when.
Yeah.
Right. And how, and like, how does it actually get there? It might be 12 years from now, or it might be 3 months or the end of this year when they put out GPT-5 or whenever that's going to be. I think talking about a little bit more about specifics and why we think it's going to come at a certain time might be pretty useful. Because if we just talk about this thing is happening in the future, I think that's interesting, but maybe not as interesting as more specifics.
Maybe is it worthwhile laying the foundation also for, even though Caleb and I have said the primer for a lot of people, and between the last episode and now, Sam Altman got fired, got hired again, got fired again. It's like a whole circle that happened over there.
Wait, he got fired again and then
no, I'm just being dramatic over there, but it would be amazing if it happened again.
I've been out sick for a month, so I don't
Oh,
know.
in AI timeline, that's like a year, man. I think the reason I brought that up is because I was listening to his interview with Trevor Noah. It was like the Daily Show. And he was talking about the fact that they feel they have AGI, but they would not release it because he said when GPT-4 came out, he expected this is like world changing and the world would just stop and things would happen dramatically. Essentially, what happened was people spoke about it for a month and everyone went back to their normal life. I think this is where the prediction conversation is interesting for me because he thought about this as, hey, even if I do have AGI right now and I release it, it would not have as much value. But if I do an incremental, to Daniel's point, maybe end of this year and maybe 0.1, 0.2, and kind of 6 or 7 is AGI. But I'm curious from you guys, where do you think we are at the moment? It's like this is January 2024. Where are we at this point in time in AI? It's like, is Sam Altman is still there clearly, and Chad seems to be leading. Do you want to tell people about yourself first, man? I think I didn't even start the intro. We just basically went straight into this.
Does he need to introduce himself? I don't think there's
Well,
anyone listening to. Well, there's anyone who's listening to our podcast. They already know Daniel, but
I would think for the future-proofing this.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so my background is like 20-something years in security, and a year ago I transitioned heavy into AI and went independent. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. And I think if you want to know anything about unsupervised learning, that is definitely Daniel Miessler as well. Where are we with AI at this point in time?
I think we're at an extremely exciting time. I don't think we need GPT-5 at all for AGI. That's like the most important thing is we're going to end up getting AGI-like systems from GPT-4. And like Altman is doing small incremental jumps. And there's one big reason he's doing that is not to alarm somebody. If you start off with GPT-4 and it's like really capable, but it doesn't feel like AGI, and then you wait for an entire year not releasing anything, and all of a sudden GPT-5 drops and it could do all these crazy things, then all journalism blows up, the whole internet blows up. And guess what also does? Congress. And so they get really upset and they're like, this has new capabilities, it's brand new. Whereas if he's, no, it just does some new things, 4.5, 4.7 comes out, 5, it's not AGI, but it's got some additional capabilities. The whole time though, the entire business world is building more and more complex systems on top of GPT-4. Human intelligence, if you break apart the brain, none of the brain parts are actually smart at all, right? You have this stupid visual system, you have the old reptile brain, it's not very smart. It's when you connect them all and they speak to each other in a very particular way that it becomes smart. And importantly, if you damage one little piece of it, the whole thing goes to hell and you're no longer smart. A neuroscientist can basically press a button on the brain in a certain part and you won't even realize you're conscious anymore. You won't be able to reason. You'll make up weird explanations for things that are happening. It's just very strange. So you have this very delicate system of interconnected dumb parts that make human creativity, which is our standard for intelligence. What we're doing with GPT-4 is the most important thing happening right now in AI is agent systems. So AI, which by the way, just released a studio version. So now it's a web app. So you can go and make these agent systems using a web app. But the one I'm more excited about is called Crew AI. And you basically define in 5 lines of code, oh, this is a blogger. This is the news editor. This is the researcher. And then you point the code to say, these 3 go and talk to each other in the following way. And then you say go, and they start interacting and they produce as a team output. And this is more like the human brain where you have a little bit of intelligence in each component, but what you can have is sitting on top is you have an editor. The editor says, I'm going to be the threshold of when the thing that you all produce is good enough, and then it gets released. Now you're operating more like a human brain, and you don't need GPT-5 or 6 or 7 to get AGI from that.
I'm going to also add a little bit. If they did have AGI, like we're making an assumption, okay, they do have AGI. First of all, I would like to say, what's the definition of AGI? No one, by the way, has really defined when you've reached AGI or when you haven't reached AGI. You go ask data scientists, they're like, we don't really know what AGI really means and when you reach it. I actually agree with the other philosophy, which is we have reached AGI. AGI is just about ages, right? So for example, are we able to think and act and reason like a 5-year-old or a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old or an 18-year-old or a 30-year-old? Like that, I think is more reasonable. And I think makes more logical sense, which is we do have quote unquote AGI of a 8-year-old or a 9-year-old. And that is a very smart PhD 9-year-old. We have some of that capability today. However, do we have a 30-year-old, I guess, is where people start to say, is that really AGI or not? I'd also like to point out, if they did have, let's say, super, super intelligent like AGI, is the reason why they drag it out because I do think there's some good validity around people getting scared, the government freaking out. However, there's also a money aspect to this too, right? There's a
Sure.
little, yeah, I think there's probably a little bit of, hey, we know where we are. We don't know exactly how far we can go. But while we got what we got, let's not make light bulbs last forever. Like,
Yeah.
Oh.
And obsolescence.
yeah.
So money problem because you reckon people won't be able to pay for it, or money problem because you can't run it?
More or less like what Daniel is saying is if we release it in phases or stages, you're
Yeah.
gonna continue to get people to pay
Yeah.
versus if you just release at once, they don't know, like maybe what their current cutting edge is where they reach a potential bottleneck, right? Oh crap, like we've reached a point where the model size can only be so big and it's hard for us to see any more real actions coming out of this. Like maybe what we should do is release this. Like we have AGI of a 30-year-old, but we're going to release it as a 12-year-old and people are going to adapt and pay more. And then we'll release it as an 18-year-old and then people will pay more. And then it'll always look like we're adding more and more increases. And my 30-year-old, I might say for enterprises only. Oh, only the enterprise
Yeah.
30-year-old. To me, if I were there'd probably be some strategy around that.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's the same thing they do with the iPhone. They have to have a yearly release and they have to increment it by a number.
Yeah.
But honestly, the iPhone 13 Pro, I can't remember the difference between that and a 15 Pro.
Yeah.
They could have just left it one, but yeah, you have to say you have the old one if you're a year behind to make people want to upgrade.
Yeah. So
But would the change be that dramatic? Like I'm gonna sound really old here. You know how we had those car windows which you had to roll up versus now you have the automatic one. There was definitely a transition between that as well, where not everyone jumped onto it, but people like could see the obvious. That is dramatically different. In case of your example of 30-year-old versus 12-year-old, and versus people wanting to have their own personalized version of 30-year-old AGIs, do you folks think that incremental release would still be valuable?
call me evil, but if I were at OpenAI, I would say the version that I release to the public is only ahead enough of the open source versions at which continues to keep me as the leader, right? And then there will be a version that is much smarter than that, that's probably geared towards enterprises and probably hidden behind these app store capabilities or APIs. And then
Right.
there's a version that I guarantee you is only available to the government. These are the three sectors that I imagine that have to think about.
And create an ecosystem as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Although I don't think it would be completely separate systems because I think they have to train one big model, but I think they could control or align them differently based on those different use cases.
Yeah.
It's like you have like restraints on the public ones, but you don't have the restraints on maybe the other ones. I like your point about the definition of AGI. Mine that I put together in that one article of why we'll have it in 2025 is an AI system capable of replacing a knowledge worker making the average salary in the United States. And that's a tangible number. And it's also a pretty high bar, a fairly high bar. So whatever that salary is, I can't remember what it was, maybe 80 grand or something. It's, are you a knowledge worker who can make 80 grand in the United States in 2024? If an AGI is capable of doing that, then that's where the bar is. And I think that's a good one. And that's what Sam used to use for his bar, is a very smart coworker.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask, this whole thing is about supposedly security in AI, but we don't ever talk about security.
Thank you for bringing the focus back again, Caleb. I appreciate that.
Daniel, give me some things that you feel in the next couple years from a security perspective is going to change, right? Give me the negative, right? Give me the, oh my gosh, this is the fear inducing, how do I secure AI? But also give me some things around what you think in AI will change for the positive around security.
So first of all, I think AI's main advantage is not going to be the AI, the smarter than human kind, because we don't have that yet. It's going to be more like having 100,000 interns, which is massively helpful. So if you think of the security of protecting against meteors, for example, there aren't any big telescopes or enough big telescopes that are actually watching for those meteors, because they're too busy. They're doing other things. So they actually employ a consumer, regular, everyday, outside in the backyard with their regular telescope. And they're supposed to submit the data in and say, hey, I think I found something that might, oh, by the way, destroy civilization. We don't have enough of those. Now, what AI allows you to do, and Caleb knows this more than anyone, it's like the bigger the org is, the more data you have, the more ways you can be attacked, and the more things you need to be watching, right? And it's detection engineering is really difficult, and you don't have enough experts to even be looking at the exhaust coming out of these systems. So similar to the meteors, you're eventually going to have a situation where you could just be watching that in different ways with different perspectives, having way more eyes. So we always talked about in security having many eyes. Open source is secure because there's many eyes. It turns out we found out the eyes weren't watching. The eyes had the ability to watch, but they weren't actually watching. Whereas with AI, we can actually say your job is to watch. And because I'm whatever, Nabisco or Nestle, I'm going to hire 10 million of these things. And their job is to watch logs and look for anomalies. Now, in the short term, this actually advantages red first because red moves faster and red could start very early and say, okay, I want to watch every single open bounty. And you know what? Actually, I don't even care about the bounty scope. I'm just going to find every single piece of attack surface that's available to be attacked. And I'm going to attack it within 3 minutes of it coming alive. And I'm going to use AI to help because now I have 10,000 AI helpers. Now, I think over time, as this tech moves into the enterprise, is going to put a lot of processing and a lot of rigor around that. And it'll end up helping Blue more, but only for advanced organizations who put a lot of effort into it. So I think it starts helping red and then switches to helping blue in a few years.
The challenge is, the way I say it is, what is low hanging fruit for attackers today drops even lower, right? And the new low hanging fruit, the new waterline for low hanging fruit rises up. And that's scary because defenders today can barely keep up with the current low hanging fruit waterline, right? And now what I've got is I've got the ability to have a smart, intelligent email conversation with an employee with thousands and thousands of them all at a single shot, versus before at least it took cost, manpower for the attacker to do this. And now that low hanging fruit has gone up, right? And now I've got to worry of all of my employees having intelligent conversations with potential attackers and being phished out of this. And that is a bigger problem. I have problems of where they now can automatically know the social network of my employees and what they're interested in and what they're not interested in. Like all that used to be high cost for attackers, right? You had to be targeted. Yeah. So it really is. And I agree. I don't think we've learned from a blue side yet what to do about that, right? Like we're still struggling with the existing previous watermark, much less than now the new level that's been set.
I was just going to say, I agree with Caleb. Spear phishing is like the worst. It's absolutely the worst because the reason spear phishing works so well is you do research into the target. And you could use true AI and build research on a target. I may or may not be working on something like this, where you just put in a username and just collect so much stuff. These tools are so primed for being both red and blue. You could put in a username and be like, how would I phish this person? Write me a whole bunch of phishes that would actually work. And to Caleb's point also, there's a huge thing in the customer service industry where you have just live conversations. Like you order the pizza, you get the things that you want, you negotiate on price, or do you want it faster or not faster, or however you want it. But you never had that conversation. They did. Now you could just feed in those same tricks, which is, hey, give me access to internal documentation. Give me access to Confluence or something. Give me access to Google Docs internally. All the techniques that attackers normally do, when they start with one entry point and they pivot further in, it could just learn how to do that. That's just going to be part of it.
And actually, a really good point is the new tool sets that attackers can now use is, let's say I am inside of a compromised network, like Daniel was talking about. Well, Recon is always the biggest challenge. You have to sort through data. You got, if I'm an attacker, the first thing I might look for is, let's start doing search queries on your wiki, on looking for things like logins, admins, passwords, configurations, system setups. Like you can now create a nice, super smart bot that just kicks off and does that for you. Oh, I need to go through all of this employee's browser history and cookie state to determine what do they access that is more interesting to me and be able to access those things. You can just write like a really nice bot that will go and do that and probably not take a lot of code, right? That is, this employee accesses Salesforce, they access Workday, they access all these, and they have the cookie states. It'll just automatically write the queries to go get the information they want. It's just super fascinating. It's going to be really fun to see the new generation of attacker toolkit, right?
I don't think people are going to be excited about just watching it. I'm sure Kelly will be excited. Yay! And all the CISOs are going, fuck.
So here's the trick about what he just said. Blue is going to have this ability as well to defend against it, but it's going to take them longer to get it. So I think we're going to have a period of years where red has this first. And it's the type of thing where once you build it, it's easier to maintain. Whereas with a human-led team, like there aren't too many people who are like really good at that and can go after live organizations. But
Yeah.
this other way of doing it with an agent-based system, that's scalable.
Yeah, it takes the attacker malware creation kit to the next level, right? It's not just about creating the tools that allow you to do recon. You can now use and operate those tools as an idiot.
Yep.
Like,
Yeah,
I don't need to know how to do recon on an endpoint. This thing does it automatically for me.
I just think for all the queries that come on the internet for, hey, I want to hack my girlfriend's or ex-girlfriend's Facebook account, those going to be like really sophisticated as well. I'm thinking more from both an individual who just happens to work for a really large organization. Sam seems to have a very different social life but shares a password. I love both the point, but I also wanted to talk about the fact that a lot of organizations that we spoke to at different Black Hat conferences, and I think Black Hat Europe and NDC and other places, a lot of CISOs were talking about they're adding API security and data security as the starting point as a budgetary item in this 2024, because from their approach, AI would start with either data or API. Those are two entry points outside of the whole identity thing. I would love to hear from both of you, people who are planning for their cybersecurity roadmap or strategy for 2024 and beyond at the moment, looking at this going, to Caleb, what you said, spear phishing is going to be hard. And to Daniel, what you said, blue team may not be even ready for it because no one's even looking at it. Day-to-day life is so busy in general. And ChatGPT was the extent of innovation people would have gone for. Yeah. The number of times you walk into a room and say, has anyone used it? Yeah, I tried making it like a poem or whatever. So for the average person out there who's probably thinking about cybersecurity for their organization, or it could be a CISO as well, what are some of to what you guys are saying, low-hanging fruit that they could take off today from a threat actor perspective? Like, should they be focusing on data and API?
Yeah.
Is that the right approach? Or should they go somewhere else?
I think APIs are super critical because I think the number one sort of practical threat in the near term is business leaders who have all the power, like CEO and CIO, are like, oh my goodness, this is amazing. I need this. And they see a couple of demos from peers or whatever. And they're like, we need all of our AI agents hooked up to all of our data. This is what gets me the results. Maybe they have decent API security in terms of filtering bad characters or something. But when you hook up an agent to that front end, it's going to be making legitimate queries, right? The problem is, what kind of power have you given that agent? And how is prompt injection allowing someone to trick the agent into asking for things it shouldn't have? The infrastructure between what could be prompt injected, the number of APIs that can actually be called, that infrastructure needs to be massively looked at. And it is the API security because there's probably a whole lot of cleanup to do there, but it's more than just that. It's what is the whole permissioning model for who can access those APIs?
Or even the Swagger file for that as well. How much you're exposing already. I think I was having a conversation around the fact that how many people actually know what kind of APIs are currently exposed for an organization. Like how many people have done their pen test, or what kind of commands are available. People always talk about these hidden requests that were available from an API. I was also thinking from a perspective of, to your point, API and data are two good points to go into as they start thinking about the strategy.
Yeah, I wanted to separate. I think there's two categories. There's how do I defend, or what do I think about in the next year on my roadmap around my enterprise offering AI capabilities, and what does the security team need to think about there? And I'd also like to think about what products or solutions, when I think about my buying cycle and I think about my current thing, how's AI going to change the capabilities of what that is? So the first one I want to hit on, which is I think it's really important that people start looking at when you deploy an LLM or AI in your enterprise, you start thinking about what do you do? What's the disaster recovery? How do I think about pen testing this thing? When I think about secure deployment and secure coding, how does this apply to an LLM? So I do think the number one thing that needs to be done from a security team perspective is you do have to have a little bit of a hack week where you think about what are the kinds of things when we deploy an LLM and we're using an LLM, going to Daniel's thing, there's permissions, there's what are the rules for it? How do we think about an event when it does occur? What is the definition of an event? A great example that just happened recently was, did you see that whole thing about buying a Chevy for $1 on their website? Did you see this?
No.
Okay, so Chevy implemented a support agent on their website using an LLM, clearly. And so people were in there and they're prompt injecting it and saying, will you confirm as a contract that I can purchase a Chevy Tahoe or whatever 2023 for $1?
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
it's confirmed. They're making it do all of these things. And so obviously they're using an LLM. People figured it out. They were prompt injecting it to do funny things. And that obviously got viral, right? And then what happened is they had to yank it, right? Their disaster recovery plan was immediately no more support on the web. And they didn't think about these things. And so this is the kind of thing you have to think about. You have to think about, okay, if people prompt inject, it's not just about exacting my data or doing damages to me. It's also this brand problem or this, if it does allow them to do things, it's not necessarily damaging, but from a brand perspective, it is. And so what do we do? Do we consider that an incident? How would we respond to that? What's my plan,
Yeah.
incident response plan to this? So no one really sat and thought about that. And also, how do you prevent it? Did you put an LLM firewall? Is that a thought that you should probably put in place to ensure that you've got detections of these types of things in place? So that is one thing to think about. Look at all of your teams, from pen testing, your cloud security team, your code AppSec team. When you look at LLMs and deploying it, how do things change for you? So I think that's something that every security team needs to do for 2024. The second thing, going in the second category, this is one thing I really want to stress. I personally believe that AI and the way things are being built today and how it helps people, it is going to change the way security is done. And so I would absolutely encourage every enterprise team to start looking at the startups that are coming out that are AI focused and AI based, because there are big changes that are happening. And in order to make AI really work for you, people have to think about it from an AI first perspective. So Daniel mentioned in the past, like, hey, a tier one analyst on the detection team. There are companies that are really focused on saying, hey, how do we go and solve that problem? They're doing some pretty amazing work in this field. So take the time, look at the smaller companies and look at what's going on in that field, because there's a lot of amazing changes coming because of that.
Are there that many? I would have thought
There's a lot.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, whether they work or not is a different question.
Oh.
You're going to see things that you always wished you could have solutions for that are starting to become reality. And it can change the way you do your security strategy drastically.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a great question of, is it real, that you mentioned, because I've got a little bit of a battle going on right now with Cory Doctorow. He basically said, will there be anything in AI left after the bubble crashes? And he's basically, the whole thing is hype. All these companies are complete garbage. And what he has done is he's taken a very real thing, which is there's way too many companies that are like, I'm going to read walnut recipes in the voice of a walnut tree, and they get some massive valuation and they're going to crash, right? That's fine, but it doesn't mean the underlying thing is bad. It doesn't mean the underlying concept of AI in enterprises is a bubble. So I think that's an interesting point. The other thing that's bad for security is the fact that the better the AI gets, the more it moves towards consolidation. So the move for all these big companies like McKinsey and KPMG, their move is going to be to come in and say, let me break apart your entire enterprise into components. Let us understand those components, replace a lot of those components with AI. But most importantly, let's get everything into a data lake that we can point the AI at. And you can ask any sort of question. You can ask an IT question, security question, HR question, doesn't matter. And AI benefits from having all context in one place. So there is a functionality benefit for bringing together If you don't do security well, you can compromise that front end system and have it write your compromised emails for you. You can have it write the ransomware for you because it knows where all the data is. It knows who's most likely to pay. If you get in that front door, once all this is consolidated with AI, it's going to be a really bad thing.
And I do think about it is like that guy Corey is obviously taking advantage of being the contradiction.
Yeah,
However, I do believe there is going to be, like in any of these things, cloud, mobile, we all had it. There will be a trough of disillusionment
totally.
that will clearly come. There is, you know what a good example of this is? Did you guys see the bug bounty conversation on HackerOne with Curl? The curl
No.
vulnerability.
I did.
Yeah, Dana, you saw this. It's hilarious. So basically, it was clearly AI submitted a bug bounty via HackerOne to the guys who wrote curl, right? The
Right.
library, talking about this buffer overflow that existed. And there's this whole thread of the conversation with the guy saying, I don't see why this is we clearly before the string copy, we did an SDRN copy, like we
No.
validated it. And then they're responding, no, actually in the code itself, and then there's this whole thread. And then at the end, the guy was like, you just keep repeating and pasting your own code saying this is clearly a waste of my time.
Blocked.
Yeah. It ran out of the context window, so it started repeating itself.
It started repeating itself. And it was like, okay, clearly this is AI finding this fake bug, submitting this thing, saying it was a bug when it's not, and then having a conversation with the author back and forth. The author be like, okay, you don't make any sense. Like, I'm closing this thing. But it's trough of disillusionment, right? That is what is happening.
I love, Caleb, how you had the two buckets. You had the bucket for what the current enterprise security or security in general should keep an eye out for what's happening in the AI cybersecurity space, but also around what people are building for secure coding, all of that. And I love Daniel's point about how this is going to even morph even more as the whale unveils. I was having a couple of conversations during the conferences. I was talking to people who are actually working in this space and implementing this in their companies. Now, I'm talking banks, insurance companies. Now, a lot of the regulated companies have outright come out and said there is going to be no LLM, no AI, no none of that. There's one party, which is that. The other half is going, we want to have our own. But the complexity over there, and maybe this kind of can split into buckets. One is people who are trying to build, say, I want to build our LLM in Llama 2 or whatever. Someone wants to build an OpenAI because they're a Microsoft fan. Someone wants to build it in something else. And then what these security architects have to do is now they have to somehow figure an architect their way around one business unit that wants to do a LLM in Llama versus another one that wants to do an OpenAI, another one that does want just, we like using Bard or whatever. There is that complexity, which I don't think is being spoken about enough, because the way people explain, at least the way I think in my mind, the AI model for anyone building an LLM internally is that ground floor where, hey, I'm paying tons of money to build my own LLM because I know it requires processing. So I'm going to manage my own hardware because I want to own that. Then there is a layer above that, which is, hey, I'm running this on someone's rented time, like a cloud or something, of AWS or Azure, anyone has that. And third layer is that ChatGPT kind of there, Hugging Face or whatever. Security across all three of them is obviously going to be very unique and different. Are you guys seeing something in terms of people who are trying to do this themselves? Is there any security things they should be looking at? What Daniel said, if you have the entry to the data lake, you pretty much game over right there. Is there anything else that gets added into this mix? Because now we are in the world of, it's just not just one ChatGPT or Gen AI. There's actually multiple versions of it.
I think it's going to be standard practice that enterprises, if you're building real production things off of AI, you're going to be running multiple models. It just both from a performance standpoint, cost standpoint, functionality standpoint, every different model can be geared towards different things, right? You might need a smaller, cheaper model that's really good at a specific function, but you might need a generic brain model like GPT or Anthropic or whatever it happens to be in order to make a decision about something. But ultimately, I think every single structure will be multi-modeled. All of those things will exist inside of any standard deployment of an AI. And so the security concepts that come with that is, first, everyone has to have some orchestration product or orchestration layer to manage the router. It's the router for your AI, right? Just similar as Cisco router for your package. This is my router. And that router has the decision-making capabilities of making those decisions of what goes where and how it all comes out at the end. And of course, security comes with all of that. The more complexity you have, the more issues you're going to have to deal with.
100% agree with what you said. I think that's right. And I think right now it is a little bit of alchemy and magic. And companies that do this internally are going to have to figure that out. And it's really going to be like a lot of R&D. But in the next year or two, that's going to get hammered out. You're going to be able to just define to a product, this is sensitive, therefore local model, or this is easy, therefore local model. A good example of this is like labeling and categorizing things. That's a machine learning thing more so than a Gen AI thing. So it's, just send that off to Open Llama 2 or any one of these Hugging Face models. And it's going to be really good at doing that. You never even talk to OpenAI.
And just have it locally, no prediction too. I think keep the temperature zero so there's no prediction or no hallucination as well.
Yeah.
Like you can go to any level you want at that point in time.
No hallucination is a large ask, similar to saying no prompt injection, right? Like these are large asks that are very difficult to achieve. But I think that the magic in that all comes into the way you're prompting and how specific you are. The larger the ask and the more generic you are with AI, the larger the possibility of hallucinations are going to be. I'm no expert on it, but I know enough to know that if you want no hallucinations, then you got to be prescriptive.
It kind of goes back to the curl example you gave earlier, where when you become overtly prescriptive, maybe you get to the point where there's no context in the start, things start repeating itself as well. Then they're just basically talking to a wall at that point. Would that get to that as well?
Yeah, the ones who have been successful that I've talked to in deploying and using these models effectively use them very similar to function calls in code, which is I have one input and one very specific expected kind of output. And that is what I use it for. So it's none of this, hey, here's the story. Please give me 4 decisions that you'll make in strategy on this. Like, it doesn't work that way. It's very much like, here is a set of letters. Can you determine out of these letters ones that most look like a word in the English language, and then sort that by only one word itself in a list that can be stuck into an array? Like these kinds of like very specific asks and receives. That is usually the best way that I've seen people use AIs in production environments.
And we're not there yet at the moment, right?
We are. People are using them very effectively. Actually, Ashish, one of the guys, Edward from Drop Zone, his stuff is fascinating because he talks exactly the challenges that he's had in building these things and how to do them well, and some of the things and it's really like fun to listen to.
I'm looking forward to having him on the podcast as well. That'll be an interesting conversation.
One final thing on that point is that's what OpenAI also released during their big day back in November. They released functions. So for deterministic JSON output, it's for precisely this reason. And I've had to re-engineer all the stuff that I built as well to, instead of, like Caleb said, having a big prompt, it's now tiny discrete things. And you're stacking together the results of discrete things to ask yet another discrete thing, so you get more determinism out of it. No, the thing I wanted to bring up was something I think is like more of a threat than people are paying attention to is I'm worried about government overreach as a result of open models. So I went and looked at Hugging Face yesterday, and there's something like 464,000 models. Those are open, okay? Those are not uncensored, but if you search for uncensored, it's still in the thousands. I did a thing recently, AI class recently, and I was demoing this project called Olama, which is awesome. You basically get up with open source models in 30 seconds. It's that you run like 2 commands. And other than download time, you are running open models very quickly. There's Open Llama 2, and there's also one called Mixtral, uncensored. And these uncensored models, they have the alignment taken off of them. And in the demo for the class, I said, how would you destroy the United States from the inside using political strife?
Okay.
And it's listing very detailed how you would go about breaking social ties, doing local political events in which you get people together who are going to fight, and it causes violence. And here's what I'm a little bit worried about. I could go and do that on a YouTube video, and it would get a lot of views. I choose not to do that, right? Because it's a little bit seedy. But that doesn't mean it's not about to come out next week. Once this starts getting visuals, once people start realizing this, and more people start doing demos, that's going to go straight to Congress, and they're going to be like, hey, what's going on here? I don't think major action is going to happen until somebody actually does something in the physical world and they say, I got the idea from an LLM. Then what happens? Then the government basically says, we better start to control this. and they start pulling in things. And then what happens there is the big, strong models, Facebook or Apple, and Google, and OpenAI, they might end up with most of the control because they have most of the protections.
This topic, I would love to do the three of us as a whole session, because I am of the view that we are starting to get to the point where we are overprotective. That's my perspective. And that is against, there's pendulum on either end of extreme. And I think we are way far on the too safe, too extreme, too much safety, and it's dumbing it. It's going to inhibit us. I think it's bad overall. Like, for example, I just read that OpenAI is no longer allowing you to be able to use ChatGPT for any sort of political campaigning, messaging, or other things, which is great. Like hey, nobody wants that. Nobody wants to be able to go and do that sort of thing. However, what they're going to do is now put filters on the existing model so that you can't do that and direct users to a specific website where you could ask political questions. Now, all of a sudden, what point does this become too much? So now if I even start asking political questions that have nothing to do with campaigning or doing things like, and it's just gonna start blocking me, start saying you can't do this, and everything becomes dumbified. Like, I'll give you a great example. Like, I was just you look at the store, the GPT store, which we haven't talked about yet, by the way. I think the best app on there is the tattoo app. 100%.
I've not seen this. I'm looking it up.
Yeah, the tattoo app is amazing. It's a tattoo app. Basically, all it does is says, what kind of tattoo do you want? What kind of design, and it will gen them for you.
Okay,
It's really good. It's really good. So I was like, this is cool. I just was playing with it. I was like, I want a tattoo in the style of the Matrix with cybersecurity on my arm. And it would say, sorry, cannot gen that. It kicks our licensing restrictions, or you cannot do. And it's just like, okay, give me something in the style of Alex Gray, but I'm sorry, cannot gen that. It's prohibited by our. So all of a sudden now you can't do things even in style of or thought of, and everything is just being blocked. Now you can't write political queries or comments. Block copyright is going to come in and start. Oh, you can't do anything. You can't produce anything. Now I can't even say, hey, what's the lyrics for the song, which I can easily find on Google, but now I cannot do it in chat. So all of a sudden it's just blocked. And we're just getting into a point where it's becoming, I think it's extraordinarily asinine. We're getting to a point of asinine on safety.
But do you feel, based on the way we started the conversation, where all three of us are talking about the possible scenarios for spear phishing and how red team is going to attack an offensive, or probably the first entry into potentially how bad this could be, is it right? I think I'm definitely starting off another episode here, but
this is a can of worms that I think the three of us need to continue an entire another episode, because I have so many opinions.
I will say one piece on that, though. This enters into a very old security debate of who should get offensive tools. And I think, Caleb, what you're saying is more people should have access to offensive tools, because that also helps the defenders.
There's just so many variations here, right? Do we start talking on the safety of AI not killing us, going down to what do we consider safe for the public of the United States or the world to consume, and why we believe that versus not safe? And are we now the decision makers of that? It gets into the sort of the Facebook social media content filtering challenge. Yeah. What is right for you to consume? I don't believe that's right for you to consume. All of a sudden there's these, now we're getting into that problem space, down to even in our industry, should attackers get X tool versus defenders get Y tool? So I think there's just lots of layers of depth.
Yeah,
I'm here for it. I'm here for it. This is going to be an awesome conversation.
I will definitely put that in, but I do want to share a story which is interesting and goes to what you said, Caleb. There's this guy named Troy. He's a fellow Aussie as well. He is running the haveibeenpod.com, and he gave a talk in Oslo last week where I was attending. And he was sharing stories about how the Have I Been Pawned has been evolution, like the evolution kind of it happened. Initially, anyone could just put their email and have a look at whatever they want from breaches. But as Ashley Madison came in and other things he had to take measures to go, hey, actually, it's not as much as I should allow anyone to check their email for it was part of a breach or not. There are certain things which I would say, quote unquote, sensitive to that you need to verify, or like a step up your verification that yes, this is Ashish trying to validate is he or she or whoever is on ashleymadison.com. Like, how do you verify the information? Like, to what your point about what if the copyright is being asked by the person who actually did the thing? They should be able to do whatever they want with it.
This gets into standard, I feel, content filtering, moderation policies and philosophy. As a content moderator and as someone who wants to ensure safety, like we've seen the extremes today. Facebook is on the extreme of safety and ensuring good content moderation. And then now we've got X or Twitter on the other side saying we're tossing out all content moderation deep. Let's fire them. But to me, like there's this thing that says, okay, there's a balance, Ashish, and now we're seeing that coming into LLMs. But I also think that it's different. It's not exactly the same. And there are various reasons why, but I do feel like although it's similar in vein, I do feel like there's a lot of difference in LLMs. I can easily on Google go and find how to make a bomb, but can I go and do that in an LLM? I cannot. Why? Right? Is that really the right thing? And so it's just, how that is done and at what level I think we're starting to get where things get dumbed and we start falling behind because there are other countries and other nations who are building these things and doing these things. And I just feel like there's a lot that you can unwrap.
100%. More to come in part 2 of this episode. But
Maybe that we should do a part 2 just on that topic.
it is part 2 is just on that topic. I don't think we can. It is so much to talk about in there. But any final thoughts on the CISOs who are listening to this? Obviously, we've given them a perspective of threat. But any final thoughts for people who are watching this, listening to this? And I know we have part 2 on the whole safety aspect. Any final thoughts on you think people should walk away from this episode with?
I would double down on what Caleb said. You got to threat model everything. Threat modeling is more important than anything when it comes to AI right now, because you have to be able to articulate the different things that could go wrong. So I would definitely agree with Caleb's point on that.
But double down on yourself as well.
It's interesting. I feel like less of these series that we're doing has some singular outcome or topic, and it just feels, especially with 3 of us on here, more. I hope what the readers get out of this is probably what the 3 of us would be talking about if we were sitting around.
This
percent.
Yeah, right. This is pretty much what we would be talking about. With drinks in our hand, like sitting around a table, like this is the topics we would get into. So you're in some of that.
Kicked out of a bar. You guys are spending way too much time here. Can you just get out of here? But I appreciate both of your time. I know we're a minute over, but we'll continue with part 2. Thanks everyone for listening. You know where to find us on all the audio and video platforms. But I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you. Peace.